I'm always amazed at the exponential growth in the popularity of both St. Francis and his feast day, in the church especially, because, you know, I grew up an Episcopalian, and when I was little, never was I ever invited to bring a pet to church. And we'd never heard of blessing of the animals. I knew about St. Francis, but that was something my Roman Catholic friends celebrated. And then by the time I got to college, I saw my first blessing of the animals. I remember seeing the movie Brother, Sun, Sister, Moon, which is about the time this chasuble was made. And then I actually joined the Episcopal Franciscan Order. And of course, we celebrated October the 4th in grand style every year. And then after I left the order, I was in the Diocese of California, which is based around the city of San Francisco. So that was their patron saint, and almost all the parishes there celebrated. But in that time, since this is, I'm talking about the early 80s, until now, it's almost everywhere you go, all over the country, are celebrating St. Francis Day, if not on the day itself, like we are, on a Sunday. It's actually a lesser feast of the church. It's not like our own patron, St. John the Baptist, or Thanksgiving, or Christmas, or anything. But it has turned into one of the most popular and most fun Sundays for many, many worshipers. And that's probably no surprise because of Francis's love for creative order and animals. Makes him very, very popular with those of us in our society who love pets so much. But the thing about Francis is you can't pigeonhole him. He is not a one-issue saint. In fact, if you picked an issue for St. Francis, one, it would not be birth baths and puppy dogs. Francis's main concern was being in solidarity with the poor, the sick, and the marginalized. Not ministering to them, although he did it, but being in solidarity with them. So much so, being a product of his age, he romanticized poverty, called it lady poverty. It was the lady that he as a knight would fight for. And he gave away all of his possessions, everything, and lived in abject poverty. This was his raison d'etre, his reason and way of following Christ. So he was very much an activist. And that also, we can understand why that makes him popular to late 20th century and 21st century Christians, because he was out in the world making a difference with his faith and being an activist. But what makes him so unique in religious history, I think, is he was also a contemplative mystic. And oftentimes, those two things don't go together. We have our activists out protesting and things. We have our mystics sitting in caves, meditating. Francis did both. And as he did everything, it was in a grand way. His most famous mystical experience was the receiving of the stigmata. And I don't know if any of you noticed in that cutout of St. Francis, it had the wounds in his hands. You didn't notice it, look at when you go out. Francis was alone in prayer, and he experienced a seraph, one of the highest levels of angels, shooting rays of light into his outstretched arms, into his feet and side, so that he received the marks of Christ's crucifixion. And this was well attested during his life, both by medical folks who examined him, but by his brothers who had to wrap the wounds because they continued to bleed throughout his life. So he was this mystic who wanted to be not only in solidarity with the poor and the outcast, but in solidarity in the most extreme way with Christ's suffering, redemptive suffering love. And then you add on to that his whole joy and love of creation. And it was a time where a lot of religious people, you didn't connote joy with religion. And Francis did. He loved to sing songs. He loved it. It was sort of like a troubadour. And so he had this love of all created things. But it wasn't always the way we think as modern 21st century folks. He never actually, that I know of, had a pet. He just loved animals in their natural habitat and settings. But I have a little skit that Mother Marianne and I, and a little cameo from Deacon Annette, would like to share with you that points out a different way of how we interact with nature and maybe how God does. And it's called Lawns, L-A-W-N-S, Lawns and God. And so I'm going to be, since I'm getting ready to suffer under surgery, I'm going to presume to be God. And Marianne will be St. Francis. Let's see. You know, I need my glasses. Oh, I should milk this for all it's worth. Thank you. St. Francis, you know all about gardens and nature. What in the world is going on down there in the old US of A? What happened to the dandelions, the violets, the thistle, and stuff I started eons ago? I had a perfect no-maintenance garden plan. Those plants grow in any type of soil, withstand drought, and multiply with abandon. The nectar from the long-lasting blossoms attracts butterflies, honeybees, and flocks of songbirds. I expected to see a vast garden of colors by now, but all I see are these green rectangles.
It's the tribes that settled here, God, the suburbanites. They started calling your flowers weeds and went to great lengths to kill them and replace them with grass.
With grass? But grass is sort of boring, if I say so. It's not colorful. It doesn't attract butterflies, birds, and bees. Only grubs and sodworms. It's temperamental with temperatures. Do these suburbanites really want all that grass growing there?
Apparently so, God. They go to great pains to grow it and keep it green all year round. They begin each spring by fertilizing grass and poisoning any other plant that crops up in the lawn.
Well, the spring rains and warm weather probably make the grass grow really fast, so that must make the suburbanites happy.
Well, kind of not, God. I mean, as soon as it grows a little, they cut it. Sometimes twice a week.
They cut it. Do they bale it like hay?
No, not exactly. Most of them rake it up and put it in bags.
They bag it? Why? Is it a cash crop? Do they sell it?
No, Divine Master, just the opposite. They pay to throw it away.
Now, wait a minute. Let me get this straight. They fertilize grass so it will grow, and when it does grow, they cut it off and pay to throw it away.
Yes, ma'am.
These suburbanites must be relieved in the summer when we cut back on the rain and turn up the heat. That surely slows the growth and saves them a lot of work.
Well, you're not going to believe this, God. When the grass stops growing so fast, they drag out hoses and pay more money to water it so they can continue to mow it and pay to get rid of it.
What absolute nonsense. But you know, at least they have kept some of the trees. That was a sheer stroke of genius on my part, if I do say so myself. The trees grow leaves in the spring to provide beauty and shade in the summer. In the autumn, they fall to the ground and form a natural blanket to keep moisture in the soil and protect the trees and bushes. Plus, as they rot, the leaves form compost to enhance the soil. It's a natural circle of life.
I hope you're sitting down, God. The suburbanites have drawn a new circle. As soon as the leaves fall, they rake them into great piles and pay to have them hauled away.
No! What do they do to protect the shrub and tree roots in the winter and to keep the soil moist and loose?
Well, after throwing away the leaves, they go out and buy something which they call mulch. They haul it around and spread it around in place of the leaves.
And where do they get this mulch?
Well, you see, they cut down the trees and then grind them up to make the mulch.
Enough! I don't want to hear about this anymore. Saint Annette, I put you in charge of the arts. What movie do we have scheduled for tonight?
Dumb and Dumber. It's a really stupid movie.
Never mind, I think I heard the whole plot from St. Francis. A funny way to laugh at ourselves, perhaps. And I don't think it's intended to make us all run home and fire our yard services. But I do think it is a reminder on this day that the genius of St. Francis is to open our eyes to see reality, not in human ways, but in divine ways. Whether that is seeing our relationship to the poor, the outcast, the sick, the marginalized, or whether that is our relationship to redemptive suffering, or whether it is our relationship to the entire created order and those beautiful creatures that have been entrusted to us. It's an opportunity to constantly not take things at face value, but to ask ourselves, when we see these things, what is God seeing? Blessed be God in the angels and in the saints.